First, let me apologize for being a bit late. I came up from Madurai just for the evening, but I had another commitment and they ran over by an hour, so I'm coming straight from there. Second, I'll say that I can't really opine very much because when you're in power, when you're in government, you have to be very careful what you say. So I'm glad my friend Dharani has said all the things I would have said, so it doesn't have to come out of my mouth. So I guess I'll just say a few things from a very personal and sentimental perspective, and then let me talk about a few things that I think are positive, because I think we all know the negatives quite well. But my earliest memories include going to Ooty for the summer. We lived in an era where my family, who were all on public service, would go up for the entire 2 or 3 months of the summer, bags, baggage, staff, vessels, cars, everything. And we'd go and spend the whole summer up in Ooty. And then I went to boarding school from the age of 5 till 13 or 14 at Lovedale. And I also happened to be the, accidental inheritor through my family of a fairly large piece of land in Perumal Malai in Kodaikanal. So that's my connection with the place. I must say that partly because I had long stretches away because I lived overseas, but partly because my memories of the area are so vivid and so important to me. I actually found it quite depressing to go back to Ooty or to go to Kodaikanal. I just stopped going because it was unbearable for me to see how much deterioration and just mindless kind of development had happened. And then, of course, we came to office. So then I didn't have the luxury of just being an ostrich. So by good fortune, among my portfolios was a portfolio called Planning and Development, which included the Special Area Development Program, which you may remember was once called the Hill Area Development Program, once called the Western Ghats Development Program. All different components of different finance plans that after they all ended, the government of Tamil Nadu put all of these together and called it the Special Area Development Program. It was semi-functional. So because I now had a chance to do something that I would have liked to have seen done 20 or 30 years ago, we started slowly making some kind of initiatives. And the first thing was that I announced that we would have district planning or district master plan instead of the usual city, town, village master plans, because in the case of the Nilgiris, the population was certainly small enough. We are for local self-government, so we believe that Kunur and Gudalur and Ooty and everybody should do what they think is right for them. But if they do it in isolation from each other, then basically there's nobody looking at the overall picture. So I announced that because I also had the finance portfolio and I had the budget in my hands. So at that time I announced that we would do this, I think in my first budget. And then we actually put it into action, and the plan is being developed, I think, with the School of Planning from Bhopal, School of Architecture and Planning. We also were able to both facilitate for NGOs like the people who work in Connor on the waste management. You know who I'm talking about?
Yes.
Samantha Einar and a bunch of people. They came to me, and we were able to connect them up to the commissioner, and we're hoping that some of their work is a template that we can take to other municipalities up in the hill. During my time as MLA, I'd also traveled to places I'd never been before, like Kollimalai, like what's the place in Velu? Yelagiri, all these other stations. And so I had a broader perspective than just Kodaikanal and Ooty where I had grown up. And so we actually, in my last budget, I announced that we're expanding the Special Area Development Program to cover the entire Ghats, and we're going to set up a new office in Madurai and actually cover the entire Western Ghats from Kanyakumari all the way up, at least what is within our state, all the way up to our border with Karnataka and Kerala up in Ooty. So we're taking little steps. Um, I would say the tragedy is that the nature of government is inertia and limited competence. That's the reality. Sitting in government, I'm telling you, that's the reality. So sometimes you can get people like me who have the luxury of professional expertise and passion to break through that a bit. But eventually it's going to need a lot of support from uh, NGOs, from individuals, from people with enough motivation who can do this. And at least in the case of the Nilgiris, I know there are big industrialists and relatively rich people, Nandan Nilekani, Harsh Mariwala, people who have reached out to me saying, can we do something? So I'm sure they'll be able to fund things in a way that will actually add some value. So if we have the right people with the right skill set, the right mindset, the ability to put in some time and effort, and the right people to do the financing, then platforms like Sky Island, I think, will add a lot of value because sometimes you have to hold the mirror up to government and only then you get things done. It's not the natural inclination is do nothing, is inertia. But I'll just say one more thing, which is that sometimes the courts can be a plus. They're now starting to ask some questions about why there isn't any ceiling or model for who should be allowed in and at what pace and at what rate, and why does it make sense that you allow limitless number of people to come up the hill when the capacity of the road in the town is only like X, and you allow 3X the number of vehicles. So sometimes they ask reasonable questions and they pass reasonable orders, and then sometimes these things become like boondoggles. As finance minister, I pushed back hard against the perpetual extension of the Elephant Corridor Committee. It became like a livelihood for these guys, and they kept doing it for 5 years and 7 years to sort through like 23 alleged resorts. And so I pushed back and I said, either you finish it in time or I want an audit done that basically says, what is it that you're doing for so long, costing us tens of lakhs a month. So, there's a role for the judiciary. I hope it is an increasingly positive or beneficial one. But at the end of the day, I think it'll require everybody to come together: the government, public spirited individuals with the right talents and the right skill set and the right backing. And then some of this will have to be done through the courts because a lot of politicians don't have the courage to take difficult decisions. That nobody wants to bar the total number of vehicles because it's not a popular move. So, I mean, there's always hope. Inform people, and good information is always the basis for progress. And so I think I'm happy to see your efforts, and I wish all of you much success.
Thank you. I first heard the minister speaking last year at Nilgiris Caves, and when we about this particular issue, and I think it was so inspiring to hear just the fact that I mean the idea that we can be a part of this. So I guess I wanted to start with, I mean, we did have this important milestone yesterday with the court, being informed that there was actually going to be carrying capacity calculated for Uti, for the Nilgiris and the Palani. So I guess I wanted to ask all of you to speak a little bit about what people can do. I mean, aside from, at this point maybe, or at really in general, I mean, going forward, what are things that we can do?
I think that's very, very important actually. I think that the people get the government they deserve, right? It's not like politicians fall from the sky. So they're being elected by people, and the people need to be much more thoughtful and make informed choices. Now, this trade-off that says, what about development, what about employment, what about income and all that is actually a false trade-off, as most people know. But the level of information that needs to be provided to the local population to understand their long-term consequences of particular developments or actions, I think, That's where I think organizations like yours, like the Kodaikanal Collective, Chronicle, can make a big difference. Is to increase the local awareness, right? Because, and I'll say this again, somewhat sotto voce, that the worst kind of paralysis is when the elected official is not informed, but somebody gives a good idea, and then the bureaucrats, who are always happy to do nothing because they have no skin in the game, turn around and tell the elected officials, if you were to do that, that would be unpopular. And I mean, this is not a Tamil Nadu story. It's not an India story. Many of you have seen the Yes Minister, which is the single word that triggers Jim Hacker is the minister. That's a very courageous decision. So so I think if you can actually shape public opinion and ensure that that public opinion is visible, that helps decision making a lot, because for all their other sins, politicians are very attuned to having to stand for election again. So I think one way that you could really make a difference is help enlighten public opinion and get that uh, up in a way that is visible to the elected officials, whether it's at the municipality or the state. And that can actually drive a lot of government policy in the right direction.
Thank you. I mean, I think we've seen that in, I mean, really just in Kodaikanal, like I said, when we saw people who were always relying on someone like Abhijit to, file a case. Now they're talking about, well, following up in a similar manner. We just had a rally earlier this week where 50 people marched. I think many of them had never been in at this kind of demonstration, went and met all the officials and said, hey, we are really having, serious emergencies because of this. Someone who, lost a finger and couldn't get down the Ghats road in time, more serious medical emergencies. But I wonder, I mean, as an environmentalist and a writer, I mean, do you feel like that message is also getting through in fiction? Do you feel like readers can engage in other ways? Are there other kinds of storytelling that they can participate in? Yeah, these are two environmentalists who just came to the hills as backpackers and stayed on and really made a difference, and they left a legacy which really inspired me as well. I thought, I mean, you could just be visiting a place and actually be able to change it. We have tourists who've come to our cleanup drives while on holiday, and I think one of the funniest stories we had was they were picking up diapers, and then one of them said, "We really need to educate those kids." Clearly, and I said, "No, it's not the kids; it's their parents." So we had very interesting interactions around this kind of engagement, which sometimes you're going to make mistakes, you're going to, learn something new. So, anything to add, Daniel?
So I'd like to first add what Minister said, right? Nandan Nilekani, after implementing India's successful Aadhaar scheme, wrote in his book, to be a very successful bureaucrat in this country, all you have to do is do nothing. Just don't change the status quo. And most of you have been asking this, like you yourself have been, to stop multi-axle budgets, right? But the fact is,
Yes.
politics is constraining. What is actually the best is may not result in the best outcome for the party in power, right? There's an illusion that the tourists coming creates a lot of economy, but how do you go and convince them, right? A lot of people, it makes a lot of sense that many of the tourists who come to Kodi in those long buses, they do not contribute to the economy, but there's illusion that they create the economy, right? So I think these are constraining things about politics. And also, there's another big problem in hill station is there is no local economy, right? Even Ooty, at least some decades back, had some PSUs. Even those are now shut. The tea industry is dying. The price is volatile. So they all depend 90% on tourism, right? So if you have to cut tourists, so what is their livelihood? So I think it's also necessary to create some amount of local economy in the hill stations, right? I think that's more important. And another thing I also wanted to say is most often when it comes to climate change and environment and so on and so forth, we depend on international reports, right? But solution for Latin America is different from solution to India, or a solution from Africa is different to a solution to India. I mean, even in India, Tamil Nadu is different to Madhya Pradesh. You can't have one solution. So you need to have the local capacity building, right? Even most of the UN organizations or World Bank, they spend a lot on reports, but most of the money is spent on consultants. But these consultants do not actually have the know-how on how the implementation happens on ground. And I think this is another bottleneck when it comes to these areas. So you will have to the municipal corporation should have the capacity, or the local region should have the capacity. And another problem here is, as minister will always speak, is that we need more federalism, but we are going towards more centralization. So the municipality should be able to manage the town, right? Like in the US, the police station is managed by the local municipalities. But here, right now, the situation is they want to control everything from Delhi. So, and I'm not speaking politics, but even apart from that, most municipalities in this country are struggling to even pay their staff. It's because they're not self-sustaining. We need to work out on a model. Only then they can become independent and implement things. And apart from politics, I think it's also the citizenry that will have to go and educate the electors to vote. So we all look for instant gratification, right? How do you convince population, that too in a country that's highly unequal with a lot of poor people, about impacts of climate change, right? Though it's not their problem. The Indians contribute less than 50 times what an American contribute when it comes to carbon emissions. But impact of climate change will felt more in a developing country like India, more on hill stations. So, but how do you convince these people that 20 years down the line or 30 years down the line, is their children going to suffer, their grandchildren going to suffer? So how do you do it? Because as human beings, we also seek instant gratification, right? So I think that's about it. Thank you.
And these are really important takeaways. I mean, we need more urban planners, I think. And this is, I was talking to Gautam Bhan recently at IIHS, and he was just talking about this shortage, Dani.
Yeah, I think that's not a unique problem to the hills. I think
Yeah.
utter failure of urban planning is visible in Chennai every day, or Madurai. So I don't think that's a problem. I mean, that's a unique problem. But I want to go back to the point Dharani said, which is this notion of a local economy. That's true across all rural areas, but it's particularly true in the hills. And there, I think, again, we have some very positive kind of beginning, at least, in the sense that if you look at tea cultivation, even when the market was good, it was actually quite an inefficient use of space to do hundreds or thousands of acres of tea cultivation and do all this manual labor and bring in all these extra, people from, many of them Sri Lankan refugees, but whatever labor. So without anybody else's intervention, the tea industry is basically going through a lot of turmoil. I was the chief guest at Upasi, the Planters Association, a year or 2 years ago, I don't remember exactly. And a lot of them are starting to go towards intense but really high value crops, right? So like cabbage or strawberries or, like really, intense cultivation. You do 10 acres or 15 acres. Now, you got to worry a little bit about the cold storage and transportation and stuff like that. But the future is much more in these kinds of organic, special vegetables, fruits, spices, these kinds of things, and it's intense. And I think there's a lot of potential there. As the IT minister also, I've committed that we'll try our best because at least as far as Ooty and the area is concerned, very high levels of education relatively. And the Barga community has invested quite a bit. A lot of Barga expatriates around the world. So we want to try and set up some knowledge industries, some creative industries in IT, in AVGC, in the arts. And the government can build some of these tech parks where we can bring relatively low polluting or low impact, relatively low space requiring, unlike HPF or high chemical, big manufacturing. So I think there also we are starting to see the possibility because we have the great luxury of a relatively educated population. And I'm not sure what the makeup is in Kodaikanal, but I know in the Nilgiris and Ooty, Kotagiri and all is quite high of educated youth. In fact, per capita is probably better than the state average, which is saying a lot, considering it's up in the hills. So I think the local economy should shift away from this false hope that tourism is a big revenue generator, because I would say probably the top 20% or less of tourists by spending are adding more than they're damaging. and yet, of course, we're a democracy, so we can't limit it without logic. But the biggest damage comes from the millions of people. As Dharani said, "Hey, we don't even have the data, we can't really tell." So we need to actually do much better and be able to understand what footprint for what revenue or what economic impact. And I think the government is moving slowly towards that direction.
I mean, these are things that I think we've been talking about at Sky Islands and earlier as the Code Chronicle. I mean, just how do we use surveys to, help the authorities? How do we create, a kind of brand of organic produce? Rakesh and I were chatting about how there's just no quality merchandise. We've been talking about this all this time. So there's so many opportunities for creating jobs outside of tourism, and I think we really need to address that earliest. I wanted to talk a little bit before we open up for questions from the audience. I wanted to talk about this Ooty and Kodaikanal sort of, and I guess we always joke that you like one more than the other. I guess I wonder if we can learn from each other. And I think you've both got, well, several of us have got connections in both places. Can Kodaikanal learn from Ooty or vice versa? Would you like to take that, Minister?
I've been away for too long, and I know Ooty much better. Or I know the Nilgiris much better than I know Kodaikanal. My farmlands are lying fallow. It's my retirement project to go and start planting again. So I know nothing about Kodaikanal.
My name is John Matthew, and I teach at Kriya University, which is about 70 kilometers north of here in Andhra Pradesh. But have a strong connection with Madras Christian College, and before that, Nilgiris, because I studied in Staines and St. Joseph's in Kannur. One of the things I was pointing out in conversation recently was the difference between places like Ooty and Kodaikanal. I was talking to Zavitika about this. The fact is that they're very different in the sense that the Nilgiris, the hill station Nilgiris, follow a larger pattern across the country in that they were set up by the British. They were very colonial. While in Kodaikanal it's not. It's an American hill station, and that's frightfully different in terms of approaches. And while there are major conditions that obtain that are similar across this region, I think we cannot afford to miss the point about the social construct that bring the into place. And I think particularities need to be acknowledged as much as connections in order to forge them in some sense in a way that's practicable and thoughtful. That's the one thing that I would absolutely raise in this particular regard. Another point I'd like to raise, and I was just talking to Robin about this, is there is a danger, and this is about restricting potentially people coming to the hills. And the danger is, while it makes all the sense in the world to do so, there's a very real peril of it being read in largely neo-colonial lines. And that is, if we say that it's the top 20% that are giving more than they're damaging. The fact is that was the argument that was made even when the British were around, and they said that, well, how many can we admit into the hills at a particular point in time? So so one thing I'd like us to reflect upon is, how do we get around that very real social factor? And it becomes a glaring indictment in some sense. And yet, how do we effectuate equity in some sense in terms of approach? And that's something for us to consider. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I wasn't suggesting that we should only let those who can pay in. I'm just saying that this perception that all tourism adds economic value is clearly false. That's the data point, solely data point. The flip side of that is, it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, the place can only take so many people. After that, the cars get jammed. I mean, like, Kodaikanal is horrendous, right? Like, it's absolutely mind-boggling. And nobody is there to enforce any kind of traffic or parking or anything. I mean, I thought Ooty was bad. I went to Kodaikanal to give a speech. I had two police escort vehicles in front, one at the back. It still took me like, I don't know, an hour or something to cross 3 kilometers, right? So, and literally like three jeeps full of cops got down and directed traffic and made people move, and then I got out in 1 hour. That cannot be good for anybody, rich or poor. It is basically the roads don't have enough capacity. So many vehicles should not be allowed into the place, and there should be some measure that says, and what were the parked vehicles? 60% of the parked vehicles were dump trucks. So yeah, it's not about rich or poor, it's about the capacity has to be understood and you have to function within that capacity. Then of course you have to do it in a democratic manner. It's an independent fact that tourism is not all good. There's a lot of negatives. That's a separate fact.
Yeah. So I just wanted to make a point along the lines of the Ooty and Kodaikanal comparison. So this is from a biodiversity perspective. If you look at the landscape change that's happened in Nilgiris, it's much older. So when we looked at remote sensing imageries, most of the landscape change in Kodaikanal is in the last 50 years, from 1970s to now. But in the Nilgiris, we had to dig older. We had to get maps from 1800s, and it looks like most of the change happened then. So, but having said that, so one point there is that we can look at Ooty to see what Kodaikanal is going to be like, because 100 years back, what happened is what we are following now. A lot of the climate change impacts come from the east. So in each landscape in the Nilgiris, there's a rainfall gradient from west to east. So in the east of Nilgiris, some of these endemic birds like the Nilgiri pipit has already kind of vanished. So if you go from Kotagiri to Kodanad, you don't see these birds anymore because a lot of the grasslands disappeared long back. But in Kodaikanal, a lot of the grasslands have disappeared, but it's very recent. So it's what we call, it's a extinction debt. So they are still hanging on, but they will go. So it will become like the east of Nilgiris. But so what really needs to happen is restoration so that those areas will survive. So yeah, so that's just something that we can learn from.
I think, I mean, those are really what, I mean, when Zai and I were first speaking when we started the Cody Chronicle, I remember her saying that it's not too late to save Cody. And I guess those things have not happened yet, and I do feel a sense of urgency, like a lot of people when it comes to biodiversity. I wanted to call on Ashish next, talk from the tourism angle, and you could introduce it.
I'm Ashish Gupta. I'm a stakeholder in the tourism economy. I run a low impact hospitality business that's present both in Kodaikanal and in the Nilgiris as well. We essentially do adaptive reuse of private homes, and so what we instead of adding to further infrastructure, we use existing infrastructure to create capacity. And we're also a hyper-local employer, and we work very closely with local people, local experts. So that's the philosophy. I want to just share two examples, very specific examples. One is an example that's actually already been implemented in Tamil Nadu, which I think is a wonderful initiative, and my opinion is probably the best state initiative, I think, of all the states in India. In 2022, October 2022, the Tamil Nadu government launched the Tamil Nadu Bed and Breakfast and Homestay Scheme. And I was actually absolutely astonished to see how the program had been put together and how it had been implemented with very little interference from government or bureaucracy. This is a scheme that is a long time coming in Tamil Nadu, and particularly with respect to the Nilgiris and Kodaikanal, where this kind of hospitality infrastructure has just gone on in a rampant manner, an unchecked manner. For the first time, there's a scheme where fairly stringent compliance is required by an applicant who wants to run a homestay or a bed and breakfast. The incredible aspect where you upload all your documentation online, you as an applicant decide when your establishment will be inspected. Can you believe that? The applicant decides, gives three choices of dates, to the government when you can come and inspect my property. The inspection is done by a third party agency like TUV. So these are accredited agencies that come and do the inspection, and then post that you have an approval. So no other state in Tamil Nadu has implemented a scheme of this with such thought put into it. A scheme which has almost zero scope for any kind of of jugaad or any kind of shortcuts, and this is a kind of example of implementation where it can have very direct impact in destinations like the Nilgiris or in or Kodaikanal. So absolutely, I think it's something that hasn't been talked about, but I can tell you that from those of us in the hospitality industry, particularly in local communities like the hills, I think it's just been far-reaching. Of course, how many approvals, those questions about capacity, those of course questions remain. I know that, for example, since 2022 October, about 800 homestays across the state have been approved, which is still a small number for the state of our size. So that's one example of where government can actually play a tremendous role in defining how how tourism is regulated in the state in sensitive areas. Um, the second example is an example of what one can do, and I think this is where organizations like Sky Islands can play a great role in terms of creating a platform for networking and communication. Many years ago, I spent some time in Lisbon, and I visited this hill station, a hill station for local Lisbonites called Sintra, which is about an hour and a half away. And Sintra was suffering from exactly the same kind of tourism that many of our hill stations suffer from, which is overcrowding with day trippers, a very small footprint, incredibly tight roads, and constant traffic jams on weekends. And subsequently, what they did was, the government did was to create a massive parking area outside, way outside of town, banned all transportation from coming in, ran a fleet of hybrid buses. And so basically, if you came in your multi-axle bus, you come up to that parking lot, you park there, and then from that point on onwards, you would get into these buses operated by the local municipality, which they did basically had routes. And so all you did was get onto one of them, and then you could visit all the sites you wanted and come back to point. So this is something that this is kind of an example which can work very well in places like Kodaikanal or in the Nilgiris, and it doesn't take too much to do these things. So, of course, tourism is something that is as an industry, it's all pervasive, it's largely unorganized, very fragmented, and so sometimes it's one of the most difficult things to actually manage. Whatever we want to implement or do in hospitality or tourism, I think we know it has a huge impact. We know it provides a lot of livelihoods. But I look at it I look at it as any kind of initiative that we take. It has to basically pass a test with these four stakeholders. The first is the traveler, whether the traveler is an affluent traveler or is a traveler who's traveling on a tight budget. Does this allow them to enjoy? Because everyone has a right to enjoy, has a constitutional right to enjoy something that's in their country that they're a citizen of. So, can they actually? Is that initiative giving them access, and at the same time giving them a sense of place, which is a sense of where they are, and sensitizing them to where they are, and enjoying a place with respect as well as with joy. The second stakeholder is government, is local government. Can an initiative help a local government to raise funds? So therefore, in some form, so that travelers pay something to enjoy a place and be able to use those funds to actually to build infrastructure, to regulate, to in a practical way. So something that makes it practicable and easy for local government to manage. The third essentially are local communities. So when I say local communities, I mean human and non-human communities. This is their place first. So therefore, that initiative actually, help them protect what they have. And lastly is small business. So are there initiatives that can be put into place where small businesses can thrive, where they can actually show the true sense of the place that they live in, and use that to bring joy to people who come there to visit these places. So that's my two pieces on tourism here.
I just want to say something so people can see both sides of the equation, right? So this notion of vehicle parking lot and internal transport only through or kind of government run is actually a very common thing even in urban areas, right? So big cities like Madurai and all, we're now looking at no vehicle zones, and then you have to have something like a golf cart at least to take people, because again, if you're going to have equitable access, there's going to be old people, disabled people, so it's not a unique situation. But this bed and breakfast thing, when it came to me, I announced it in the budget. When it came to me, there was leg one and leg two. So leg one was at least we get some people registered, right? And they basically at least put on record what they say they're going to do. And if tomorrow they're not doing it, we can hold them accountable. And it's got complications with other things like liquor license. So it was good. But there has to be a leg two someday. That's the hard part, which is that if you find somebody operating without having registered, you've got to actually take some action. Otherwise, in like 2 years or 3 years, everybody understands that there's very little upside for registration. I mean, if you're like Ashish and you run relatively high-end people who are looking for particular quality, it's easier. I know him a long time, so I'm saying because I know him. But the ones that are really problematic are thousands and thousands of people who are running these without registering. So at the time I asked the question, I'll announce it's no problem. Let's say that you're brilliant in executing it. Remove the rent seeking, all this. At some point, you got to start having the local bodies actually enforce that without registration, you cannot do this anytime. Just because the season, it's okay, I'll turn a blind eye. That part has not yet come. It's okay, it's only 2 years. But sooner or later, we have to do that part. Otherwise, the policy will fail. Because in 2-3 years, everybody realizes there's no upside and there's no downside. So we'll just not register, right? So this is a problem with public policy. It requires both.
We already have two spokespersons from the DMK party, but since I've been working with them for the last 2 years with this particular government.
Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Praveen. I'm a wildlife filmmaker and a conservation filmmaker. I represent an organization called the Pollachi Papyrus. So I'm from Pollachi in the Animalese. Just like usual, we have a lot of representation for Kodaikanal and Nilgiris, but Animalese in Pollachi is the most ignored place. But to be honest, a lot of good models come out of there. So the first thing I want to do is, since we're having people like you and we're speaking about governance, I guess everyone should give them a huge round of applause for the simple fact that the only government probably in India to include the word climate change in their department. No other government has. Department for Environment and Climate Change and Forests. Kalanilai Matram. Somebody is even talking about, like our Honorable Minister always keeps referring to where Tamil Nadu is in all parameters with European standards. I guess even when it comes to climate change, we are doing phenomenal work. I know, Rajni, before I could make a very crucial point, I just want to do one thing. I said I will do it private. I want to do it in front of you because you actually allocated 25 crores. It's not just in policy. It's also about allocating finance and money to get these things done to save Tamil Nadu state animal called the Nilgiri Thar. And I was one of the very few 1 in a billion people to get a chance to walk the length and breadth of the sky aliens that you call to make a film which our CM launched. So I just want to give you this picture taken from the grass hills of elephant herd. Because it's not just about the Nilgiri Thar, you speak as an individual species. Because of that particular project and the money that they had allocated, it directly went into conserving an entire habitat that you're calling sky aliens. And just a kind request, since Sky Islands and Western Ghats are being used simultaneously by our Western Ghats is much beyond mountains and Sky Islands. I am from the plains. I am from
Yeah.
we have scrub jungles, we have riverine jungles. Coimbatore is part of Western Ghats. It's not just about Kodaikanal and Nilgiris and Anamalays. Western Ghats is much more than that, I guess. So we need to understand, and the problems of Western Ghats as an entire chain of mountain faces is much beyond what these hills face. And just to make one quick point, so I guess as climate activists, if you may call, I guess we've a lot of times trying to sugarcoat a lot of things, not trying to, I don't know, be nice or offend people, I don't know. I guess a lot of us here, we are making points from a very luxury standpoint. Because when somebody is talking about carrying capacity and other things, we're talking about a very survival of a species, of us as human beings. And I will start with an extreme viewpoint and then quickly wrap it up. Say, the best way to save the Skylands is stop visiting them and stop living in mountains. That is the extreme viewpoint, okay? I know it's not practical now. Now, because the best way for nature to reclaim itself is by stop meddling with it. To say that I am a citizen of a country who has fundamental right to access nature, we are not. When your very survival is under question, because this is where our rivers originate from, our perennial rivers originate from. And just because the Britishers took a bunch of slaves and created a monoculture of coffee and tea which supports no biodiversity, we are continuing to do much worse than what they are doing. So now that is not possible for us to say that, okay, let's not live there or not let tourists go. Because I know we are human beings and we are, including me, I've visited all these hills so many times. What we can do a little bit is, which is also comes under the legal framework, as sir rightly pointed out, tea is under the decline. For the first time in Valparai, in the last 10 years, the population of 1 lakh native people have come down to 50,000 people, and now it has come down to 40,000. And what the tea association people are doing is bringing illegal immigrants from Assam and Bangladesh to work there. They are not native people. Firstly, Valparai itself is not made of native people. It is migrant laborers from the plains who were taken there to work, abandoned and came back. They just don't know how to come back to the towns and lead a normal life. So tea is in a decline. So TAN Tea recently has given 1,200 hectares back over to the forest department. We have the famous Manjole case where BBTC's tea estate was taken over by the forest department. So these kind of things have to be actively pursued in entire Valparai landscape, if you know Valparai. On all three sides, it is covered by protected forests. One is Paramikulam on one side, you have Valachil, and then you have Topslip, and Valparai is ensconced in between. The 100-year lease which a government actually gave it to the private estates is getting over. What is stopping our governments from taking over those lands?
No, that's, we are definitely going to do it because I set up a committee when I was finance. I said all new leases will stop till we have a lease policy. First, I want the status of all the existing leases and no more 99-year leases. Even to the airports, we're not giving 99 years. Even to IIT Research Park, we're not giving 99 years. So any that is expiring, we'll take back. And if they're not viable as tea estates, that's why we're giving them all back to the forest department. So that you can be assured that at least in the next 2 years, in our regime, that policy is already in place. There's a comprehensive lease policy for the first time on government land, which is the people's resource. So that was already implemented around the time my portfolio changed. I'll make sure that it gets continued. And so a lot of these lands will have to come back to the people and be turned back to nature, basically.